Hi, welcome back to Beeba's Best Practices. This is episode 2, and we're going to talk about using children's literature to teach math. Everybody loves a story, but not everybody loves math. Teachers and students alike will enjoy being able to use a story to discuss math. There are abundance of resources that are already prepared for these purposes, and we're going to include a link to some of those internet resources and a list of my favorite books at the end of the video. We want children to learn the concepts, and they'll learn them better if they can relate to them. And using children's literature is one very good way to allow them to relate to them. Let me begin with an example that's excellent for even kindergarten and first graders. Many of you are familiar with a children's poet called Shel Silverstein, and he wrote the book Where the Sidewalk Ends. And as you can see from all of the post-it notes, all of those indicate poems that I've used to teach children math. And I'm going to give you a few examples of them. One example is a very simple poem that he wrote called Band-Aids. This is what it looks like on his page, and we will include a link to it. It says, I have a Band-Aid on my finger, one on my knee and one on my nose, one on my heel, 2 on my shoulders, 3 on my elbow and 9 on my toes, 2 on my wrist and 1 on my ankle, 1 on my chin and 1 on my thigh, 4 on my belly, 5 on my bottom, 1 on my forehead and 1 on my eye, 1 on my neck, and in case I might need 'em, I have a box full of 35 more. But oh, I do think it's sort of a pity I don't have a cut or a saw. This is a poem that many children in first grade, kindergarten would find very, very funny. And a teacher could easily take a cutout of a person or a real life doll and have the students put the Band-Aids in the places listed in the poem. Following that could be a mathematical discussion like, how many Band-Aids are on his face? How many more Band-Aids are on his right arm than his left arm? How many Band-Aids were used altogether? How many Band-Aids were on his leg? How many few were on his right side than his left side? You can see that you can introduce children to many word problem concepts, like how much more, how many fewer, how many altogether, how many are left, just by using this poem and letting them actually count the Band-Aids. Let's move up to the second or third grade. Shel Silverstein in this book also wrote a poem that I love called Smart. And Smart starts by saying, my dad gave me a dollar bill because I'm his smartest son, and I swapped it for 2 shiny quarters because 2 is more than 1. It goes on to make exchange after exchange after exchange where the son is getting more coins but of lesser value. And if kids act this out and actually swap the coins, they'll be able to see at the end, and you'll be able to generate a discussion of the difference between the number of coins you have and their value. And it was a very, very good way to introduce money in a second grade classroom. In upper middle schools classes and even in upper elementary grades, there's a poem that Shel Silverstein wrote in this book called If I Were 1 Inch Tall. And in that, he contemplates what the universe around him would be like if he was only 1 inch tall. It's a great way to have a discussion about ratio and proportion, and even give an assignment to build a diorama that would be what his world would look like if he were only 1 inch tall. Lest you think I only read Shel Silverstein, here are some other resources. Ralph wrote a book called How Big is a Foot? And in that, he describes how the king, wanting to make a bed for his queen, had his assistant measure the queen's height by having her lie down on the ground, and he walked off her height using his feet. He then told the royal carpenter that the bed had to be 13 or 14 of his feet long. Of course, the carpenter's foot was a different size than the assistant's foot, so the bed came out all wrong. But it's an excellent way to introduce the need for standardized measurement and to have that discussion with a class of very young students. Marilyn Burns is an educator who wrote many, many books on using children's literature to teach math. And definitely, if you're interested in using children's literature, Marilyn Burns is an author you should definitely look into. She wrote a book called A Greedy Triangle. The book specifically introduces children to the different properties of a triangle. And she wrote an entire series of books for teachers to learn to teach using children's literature. A Grain of Rice is a book that can be used in middle school and high school. And it introduces us to the concept of exponential growth. Because somebody was stealing a grain of rice. And then the next day he stole 2 grains of rice. And the following day it was 4 grains of rice. And he kept doubling it. And after a very short period of time, I believe it was a month or 2, he needed an entire caravan of camels to carry the grains of rice that he had stolen. There's another series called Pigs Will Be Pigs, written by Axelrod, and different editions of the book address issues of money, measurement, time, and problem solving. A series of books by Jerry Pallotta uses Twizzlers and Hershey bars, and by McGrath uses M&Ms to show shapes, fractions, and percents. And you can see how this would be a lot of fun for students. There are even many children's stories that were not written for math at all that I've used to teach mathematical concepts. For example, I think most of us are familiar with the book Tiki Tiki Tembo, No Sarembo, Cherry Barry Ruchi Pip, Perry Pembo, and his brother Chang. I've used this book, it was written by Moselle, by the way, to pose probability questions. Like if you pick one letter from Tiki's name, what's the probability that it will be a vowel? Let me show you a few more of my favorites. There's a series of circumference books, and Circumference was married to Lady Di of Amador, and they had a son, you guessed it, Radius. And you can take a wild guess what this book is about and what concept it introduces. There's a series of books by this author, and they all address different geometry concepts. There's also this book called A Remainder of One, and this is another author, Eleanor Princess, who wrote several books on math for children. This one, A Remainder of One, addresses times tables and division and multiplication. There's a series of books written by Anne Whitehead Nagda, which use animals to teach math. This one's called Cheetah Math, and it talks about division. I know there's one called Tiger Math. I think there's one called Polar Bear Math. And they all introduce different tasks using math that are used by the caretakers of these animals. And before we leave it, my absolute favorite book that can be used at many levels, sometimes to be read to students, sometimes to have them read, and it's called A Math Curse. And it just talks about all the ways that in our everyday life, from the time we get up in the morning to the time we go to sleep at night, we're surrounded by the math curse. And it's a lot of fun and can be used to encourage children to write math problems of their own. Books can be used to motivate the lesson. They can be used to practice concepts. And the best part about them is that they make math more palatable, not just for the students, but also for the teachers. Consider using children's literature when you plan your math lessons. There will be a link at the end of this video to internet resources on this subject and a list of some of my favorite books to use to teach math to children using literature. Thank you again for watching. And again, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'll be back soon with more episodes. Thank you. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel. If you want any additional information about Beeba's best practices or any other teaching techniques, please don't hesitate to use this contact information. Thank you for watching.